Welcome to the Retd Report, bringing you issues of topical interest. Hello everyone, I'm Renee Mera and welcome to the Retd Report, bringing you issues of topical interest. Today we're going to talk about a very critical issue. It's street harassment, gender-based street harassment, particularly in India and especially in the South Asian community, since we are a very patriarchal background, and telling us about it and what we can do for fixing this problem, which is not going to go away right away. But we have two doctors here. One is an MD and one is a PhD. Dr. Mrs. Sharada Gopal, and she's part of the Women Graduates USA, which is a nonprofit organization, has a history of 100 years almost. And there was an event at the UN in conjunction with this organization, and she's going to tell us all about the outcome from that event that took place earlier this year. And also joining me through Skype is Dr. Manish Madan, and he teaches criminal justice in Stockton University. Thank you very much for joining us from New Jersey. Thank you very much, Dr. Madan.
Thank you.
When we look at the definition of street harassment, it's about unwanted gestures and actions, sexual overtures, and it's gender-based. And and this cuts across the board. We're not talking just happens in India itself, but it cuts across the board in different countries. It's borderless. But when we talk about countries like, which have a background in patriarchalism, we're talking of India, we see it very more complex. There are a lot of variables that come in. But before we go into that, I'm going to ask Dr. Madan about that later, but I want to talk to you, Dr. Sharada Gopal. Let's talk about the Women Graduates USA, the nonprofit organization that has a 100-year history, and how you got involved, and what was your genesis behind this?
I started a petition to fight the eve teasing in India, and to my dismay, I started it after I read India Abroad. 3 weeks consecutively read about how 3 young boys were beaten to death who stood up for the girls who were getting harassed. And when I left India 40 years ago, eve teasing was there, but now it is so violent. And I was thinking, what's the country doing? What are the people doing? Let's raise our voice and start making the changes. So at 10 o'clock, I started a petition. I thought by morning I'll have million signatures. To my surprise, there were hardly like 14 or 15 signatures. Then I had to talk to each and every individual, the presidents of organizations in this country, in India, the organizations that were cultural, organizations that were involved with spiritual things. But I noticed that people were very hesitant. They have accepted it as part of culture that has lasted for eons and will not go away, and so why should we act? And I was dismayed to know the response from women themselves. I thought I'll gear towards men, but women themselves, I was greatly surprised. So then I thought, okay, if this is going to be the response from Indian women, let me start looking outside. So as I was speaking to my American friends who supported me on this, a friend of mine, an American, she connected me with WG USA, which is a national federation and part of an international organization called as Graduate Women International. It was formerly known as International Federation of University Women and has existed for almost 100 years. A strong organization. That is how I got into. And when I spoke to WG USA, they just embraced the whole idea welcomed me into their organization, adopted the resolution, and presented an event in March during the meetings held by UN.
Now, what was the outcome from that event?
It was to raise awareness and gather participation from other organizations.
We have been raising awareness on this issue. I'm sure there are a lot of advocates and from the grassroots level. So how do we take it to the next level?
Next level would be involving the GWI members all over the world and work towards Indian government and along with the UN.
Exactly, because it has to go, the awareness has to reach to the point, where there are lawmakers, and how do we work with them, and advocates. Activism has to be really strong and aggressive to get this when you're talking about awareness, meaning we have to take it to a level where we can really execute those strategic plans to try to protect women, especially because it's so gender-based. And how do we go about it? So did they have any strategic plans how to go about, any directions that they want to take at this point of time?
Yes, our first move after the CSW event at UN is taking it to our international conference that's going to be held in Cape Town in August.
I see.
So GWI members from all over the world will be coming there, and we will be presenting it over there, and then we move forward.
Right.
And we will incorporate the GWI members from India also.
Right, because that's so very important at this
Yes.
point of time. Dr. Madan, you have done extensive research in street harassment, particularly in India. There are a lot of research papers that you have written. Tell us, where does research end and advocacy begin? Because it has to be in concert. Otherwise, it just remains as research.
Well, I want to say thank you, Renee, for having me. Research is conducting systematic studies grounded in empirical and theoretical perspectives, and advocacy can greatly help in bringing the research into the public domain. Research and advocacy, the way I see it, have a very symbiotic relationship between them. And what I find, the closer, the tighter the link between the two, the better the impact you can possibly see on the ground. So think of advocacy as the voice of research and research as the voice of the people, and both of them having an integral role in shaping of the public policy. So in my view, advocacy should want to rely on the evidence-based research to fight for various social issues, including sexual harassment of women, for example. We would also like to see public policies that are being formulated to have a strong basis and that are grounded in research, supported in the data. I am personally a big believer in that we can achieve better and perhaps faster results when we work collectively as one community that share common goals. We are talking about issues that affect everyone on a daily basis, albeit mostly women, unfortunately. And in such scenarios, I don't think that it is simple enough to say that research ends at point A and advocacy begins at point B. It's got to work together to make sure to make the significant impact at the ground level. So the straight answer is that research does not really ever end for the advocacy to begin. And like you had mentioned earlier in your conversation, it is a confluence of the two. And finally, in this entire process, let us also not forget the role of media in being that vehicle to give voice to both advocacy and research. So that's where my vision is.
So there's a lot that he's talked about, his insights into this work. I think everything comes down to education, which will empower women. As you mentioned, that some men don't even think it's, sexual harassment or eve teasing. So that's interesting. If you look at from that lens, nothing seems to be wrong. And when we come from a male-dominated society, our attitudes, our societal norms, and traditional way of looking at it just gives a different perception to the same issue. So that actually complicates it. So if you're looking, from the human psyche form, or whether you're looking from law enforcement, they're totally different things. Laws are on one hand, but if a person not even perceiving it as a problem, so we really need to go back to education and back to the basics, and this is what he talked about. So, given that context, what do you think, way we can bring that safety issue for our women, if it's very gender-based? How do we protect our women from public spaces?
Well, we had some delegates from India, and they spoke about the prevalence of this issue and what they are doing. They have been holding classes, gender sensitizing classes for the boys, and in turn the boys are teaching other boys.
Interesting.
Yes, and we have to give recognition for men. There are numerous men. After I started this, I found out there are numerous men, both in India and in this country, who are fighting for women and their issues. We should give recognition.
Absolutely.
Make them the role models for these boys. Even Freud has said that a child, whether male or female, needs a father as a role model. The role of a father is very important. Most of these children grow up without either a father or a father who is involved in domestic violence or a father who is not sensitive to this issue. Not only that, I also found out that majority of the women are not sensitive to this issue. It is it's taken for granted. So, not just giving education to the boys or the girls is important. A gender sensitizing education is very important. At this juncture, I would like to talk about the men that I look up to,
Right.
and one of them is Basaveshwara. In the history, he is the first person who spoke about gender equalization. He was a great philosopher, a scholar, and minister in the 12th century.
Right. Lord Basavira.
Yes, Basaveshwara. And I have to talk about Rajaram Mohan Roy,
Yes, social reformer.
who fought to abolish the sati.
Sati, yes.
Again, Rajaram Mohan Roy could not gather any support within India.
Right.
It was possible only through the British. As much as he was against the British, he made it possible only because of the British.
Yes.
If it was left to Indians, they would not have. He also watched for education of girls. And another person is Ishwar Chandra Vidyasagar, who brought in widow remarriage. And then of course we have very many people. Gandhi has spoken, Swami Vivekananda has spoken, very many, and even now we have very good men who can be used as role models for these boys. That sort of education is very much needed, not just any education.
Absolutely, I agree, because unless it's sensitized,
Yes.
I do agree. Formal education is
Yes.
one thing,
Yes.
but to have it sensitized so that both males and females are able to understand the complexity of this issue.
That's right.
And we have such great social reform, by these great people that you just talked about. I think many times people forget, whether it's Lord Basava or whether it's Raja Ram Mohan Roy or so. Once we get to really understand the issue well, we are able to identify the problem, then we can find the solutions.
Yes.
So sensitizing is very important in the education.
And also elimination of this feeling that masculinity, most of the men and the boys, they think it is being less masculine if they stand up for women's issues.
Right. Yeah. But this is a human rights issue to begin
They
with.
do not realize
That's
that.
actually,
Exactly.
yeah.
Yes, Dr. Madan.
Oftentimes we start to see this sexual harassment or gender-based violence as a woman's issue. as a women's issue. And yes, for the most part it is, and it is unfortunate that women are at the forefront of it, taking the heat, like we were talking before. But it's also, the way I started seeing this is it's both men and the women's issue. It seems that men need to be involved also in finding a solution to it. It's not just a women's issue anymore. Perhaps it is a human rights issue. A lot of times, you look at a woman's existence in public space or private space. There are many issues that comes around with that arena, and when those issues become, if somebody is harassing a woman, let's say, in public spaces, they're violating their human rights and also as well as also the constitutional rights. If you look at many of the constitutions, for example, talk of India, within the constitution, it mentions about how there has to be equality between men and women. Women should not be portrayed in a derogatory manner. So it's perhaps going back to the basics and understand that sexual harassment or any of the gender-based violence, it's not just a woman's issue. It's a human rights issue. It's a constitutional violation of their public and private space.
I wanted to ask a different question on a tangential note. What do you think, and I'm going to ask you as well, Dr. Jayagopal, Dr. Madan, where Bollywood movies have played a role in this issue?
Yes, stating that Bollywood causes sexual harassment or any of the gender-based violence is an appealing conclusion to draw. But if we look at it in its singularity, I think it will lead us only to a reductionist approach and not focus on other important factors also that have an interplay. We have to see it in conjunction with the environmental, situational, cultural, patriarchal factors also. For example, if you look at it from an environmental or situational aspect, we need to ask, do the public spaces or public transportation provide a safe environment, particularly to the women population? For example, our study that I did with Dr. Manish, our study pointed out that nearly 4 out of 5 women do not find public mode of transportation as accommodating to the women as compared to men. And similar trends also existed about the feeling of safety, like how safe do you really feel while you are in a public space or public transportation. And those were dismissively low. So we have to ask that, what are we really doing to control from that perspective? Situationally, we have a problem with overcrowding, and public transportation is as dense as you can imagine. So given these factors, we need to ask about the actions that how are we making public transportation equitable, safe for women population traveling, using public transportation or being in a public space. So again, I know you asked me about the Bollywood, but that's where if you look at the research, it's not just Bollywood kind of singling them out that they are perhaps the reason for all the gender-based violence that exists or sexual harassment. It's a confluence of multiple factors that I just spoke about.
Ms. Jayagopal, you want to add on to this?
The Bollywood does play a role, Hollywood also plays a role, but how do we explain this sort of harassment in places like Pakistan, Middle East, Bangladesh, where most women wear burqas?
Yes.
It's highly prevalent
Exactly.
in those countries.
Right.
Yes.
So, even if you're coming from those countries, or you're coming from a country where there's a lot of exposure to films,
Yes.
We see that it's cutting across.
Yes.
Right.
I mean, yes, culturally speaking, we have to also see, if you look at the post-globalization era, like when the markets opened early 1990s, more women started coming into the workforce now. So even with the Prime Minister Narendra Modi's Make in India campaign, you're looking at creating so many jobs. And clearly we have a fairly good demographic that is represented by the women population, meaning that a lot of women would be coming into the workforce, to perform get to the job. So in that sense, when you look culturally, woman was seen as a mother, as a home bearer for the most part. And now that women are coming out, it is creating some sort of a situation where we're not really used to seeing them out in the public. So there are other cultural factors also that does come into the play of how we see in terms of the woman's autonomies, if we talk about their decision-making power, if we talk about, so all those things does add to the cultural underpinning in the role of the females in public and the private spaces.
Absolutely. And what would be your final word on this?
My final word would be change the thinking of, I feel like saying the boys and the men, but it also includes women.
Absolutely.
Everybody has to transform,
Right.
change their thinking, because the issue has escalated tremendously, which will bring down the growth of women and girls, because now more girls are getting out for education and work purposes, and this is only going to get worse.
And it's demoralizing.
Yes, and in addition, look at the jails. In the jails, 93% are male inmates, which are either boys or men. So what's happening? Nobody is paying proper attention to the boys and the men. Now that the women organizations are rising and empowering the girls and the women, nobody is attending to the boys. So looks like the women have to take on to educating the boys also, but I think the men should wake up and start acting. And I would just like to mention about this. My husband also accompanied me to the UN meeting. A week later, he read about Dr. Madan and Dr. Nalla's research in one of the Indian newspapers and forwarded the article to me. And I was ecstatic. I thought, this is transformation, this is participation.
Absolutely.
So this is what it should be.
I think, and we all have a responsibility, each one of us, to, address this issue.
Yes.
And find solutions for it. And, we talked about respect, sensitization, and there's a lot, the law enforcement. And again, it comes back to each one of us to change the paradigm. And so we have a long way to go. 2050 and beyond, they're talking about Planet 50/50 in 2020. So let's hope that when we get to that point that, we are able to address these issues and find solutions that are sustainable. Thank you very much, Professor Manish Madan, Professor at Stockton University, and Dr. Mrs. Sharada Jayagopal from Women Graduates USA. And
thank you.
Bringing this issue to the forefront.
Yes, thank you. And I would like to thank Mrs. Satya Vishwanath, who has been very encouraging and supportive of my work, and thank the ITV staff for being there.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
And I'm Renee Mera. Thank you so much for watching the Renee Report. Welcome to the Renee Report, bringing you issues of topical interest.